that we have progressed into something that is phenomenal and getting better with each episode. Now, for a while there, they were taking a break from season 3, and they've come back now, and it seems like they haven't lost a beat. So hopefully, as the progression of season 3 continues, we're going to have more exciting storylines for fans to follow. I think in season 1, it was just basically launched as a trial and error basis. They didn't really expect this show to have so much success as it did. The ratings were phenomenal, and they released season 1 on DVD a while back. They just recently released season 2. If you haven't seen season 1 in its entirety, I advise you to pick it up. I've seen season 1. I enjoyed it. A lot of the concepts, a lot of the storylines from the shows definitely were intriguing to me. The whole thing between Caroline and Damon had to be one of my favorite things from the Vampire Diaries, and the whole idea of him manipulating her through mind control and hypnosis was really neat. And I think they really, debuted a new perception for vampire stories that we've read about and heard about in the past. I think that the presentation of the vampires in this is completely different from anything that we've heard in the past. I've never heard tales of vampires having special rings that enable them to go out in daylight. Although they can burn if they don't have these rings. I've never heard anything about that before in my life. It seems like, as we get more and more teen vampire drama movies and series on television and in theaters theatrically released, it seems like we have newer, updated stories and adaptations of what vampires are believed to be. Everyone who writes a show or writes a novel has a different perception of what a vampire is believed to be. It derived, of course, from a disease which causes an individual to become severely pale. And ever since that disease was discovered, a name was put on it, of course, called albino. And now it seems like we're having more and more adaptations of what a vampire should be upon the releases of these television series and these movies. Of course, Twilight has its own version of a group of vampires and werewolves, and now the Vampire Diaries, one of the latest teen vampire drama series on television, has its own adaptation and versions of what a vampire should be. They allow that vampires can go out in the sun and wear these special rings to enable them not to be burned. You have to die to be transferred from a human to a vampire, then feed off a vampire's blood supply. Very unique presentation of a vampire, and that's something that I can't. The fact that there were so many different stories about vampires and stuff, and you're kind of sitting there saying to yourself, is there really one definite story that is what a vampire actually is? I don't think there is in answer to that. I think there are always going to be different versions of vampire tales and stories going back as far as the early 1900s. In the 1900s, you heard stories about people like Dracula, and the whole thing about Van Helsing and stuff like that. And even going back as far as that, there was a version of a vampire tale. And as the years progressed, more and more concepts and more detail were added into different vampire stories. And every author, every writer had their own version and adaptation of what a vampire is. I think that the Vampire Diaries definitely presents a unique version of vampire storytelling. It definitely goes beyond the beliefs of people from 1995, 1996, who believed that vampires were people who could only go out in the nighttime, slept during the day, fed off the blood of human beings, and the tales have definitely changed in the last 10 years, I think. Very different from what I could remember hearing about a vampire when I was a young child, Always grew up on the tales of vampires not being able to go out in the daylight, feeding off the blood of human beings, having the stake driven through the heart, not being able to see their own reflection in the mirror. These vampires in these shows can see their reflection in the mirror. They can eat everyday food, which is something that the movie Let Me In didn't allow the 12-year-old vampire to do. There are a lot of different things that are very different about this show. And if I were to list the differences between this and, say, for example, the Twilight series, we would be here all day. Um, it's interesting. What's next after the Vampire Diaries? I think that there'll be something else, obviously, when this show concludes and eventually enters its final season. I see it going anywhere from 6 to 8 seasons because of its popularity, kind of like how Glee has gone into its 7th, 8th season. They just recently had the Glee 3D concert movie released. It's available now on Blu-ray and DVD. It's either the Vampire Diaries or Glee now. It seems like that's what the most popular thing on television is. Fear Factor is back now with a new format and everything, and that's pretty popular with people. Reality television taken to a whole nother level. But it seems like it's a toss-up nowadays between Glee and the Vampire Diaries. I saw a number of different Glee shows in the past, and actually really, really enjoyed that show, and the Vampire Diaries. I can see why that's so popular. I didn't really understand why the Vampire Diaries was as popular as it is. And after seeing so many episodes of season one, then I finally caught on as to why it's so popular. I think it's just a refreshment from the whole Twilight thing, and I think that's what the Twilight fans have been looking for. An updated version of what we saw in the past. I really think that this is what every Twilight fan's been looking for, and something that I've thrown out as a possibility here on the show. With the success of the Twilight movies from the past, from 2008 right through to 2011, when Breaking Dawn was released on November 18th, I threw out the possibility of Twilight being turned into a weekly series for CW or Sci-Fi. And I would like to see that because I think that's what every Twilight fan would want to see. The probability of them making a series on it, them releasing a few video games for it for PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, that would be really, really cool, or Nintendo Wii or something like that. There are so much they can do with things like Twilight and the Vampire Diaries. They just haven't done it just yet, and I'm really looking forward to probably seeing something like that. Like I said, I see the Vampire Diaries going into maybe 6 or 8 seasons, kind of like Glee. There was a rumor, actually. I believe one of the stars of Glee actually had a relationship with one of the actors in Twilight. And when she was questioned about it during an interview on Ryan Seacrest's American Top 40, she kind of kayfabed it and, hinted that there could be some stars of Twilight appearing on Glee. I really think that, Glee and the Vampire Diaries and the whole Twilight thing really in a toss-up. And that's why I'd really like to see Twilight, turned into a weekly series. And I don't see it happening just yet, but maybe it could. I think that a lot of fans would really like to see that. Like I said, I really see the Vampire Diaries going 6 to 8 seasons. Its first season was absolutely phenomenal, and the second season is now available on Blu-ray and DVD. If you haven't seen seasons 1 and 2 in their entirety, and you're probably sitting back, enjoying season 3 right now, which is what we're having you see on CW each week, definitely pick it up on Blu-ray. It's worth seeing. The presentation of the Blu-rays are absolutely phenomenal, and you should check this one out. The most recent vampire film, apart from Breaking Dawn, is Fright Night. I talked about that here on the show, and again, in Fright Night, they have their own version of a vampire, going back to what I had originally said here earlier on the show. It seems like the authors and writers behind these films, like Fright Night and Breaking Dawn and the Vampire Diaries for a television weekly series, have their own version of a vampire. So what is your favorite tale of a vampire? Tell me what you think at twitter.com, HEW Entertainment, Jonathan Clarke 1, and join the conversation at facebook.com, Jonathan Clarke. Tell me what your favorite tale and adaptation of a vampire is. Do you necessarily think that we should have so many versions of vampire tales? There are thousands of vampire tales that have been told over the last number of years. Probably the last 50 to 65 years for sure, at least. Tales going back as far as the 1900s, early 1900s. I think that there are so many of them. Do you think we need as many as we've heard or read about? Let me know and tell me what your favorite one is at twitter.com HCW Entertainment Jonathan Clarke 1. Look for some clips from Vampire Diaries seasons 1 through 3 on our Twitter page, and definitely let us know what you think of this. I'm still battling that cold, that infection that I obtained a few weeks ago, and I really do apologize for that. But it's funny, how popular a show like The Vampire Diaries is. But when you really sit back and you watch it, and you follow the story and you get into it, it doesn't take you long to figure out why it's so popular. It didn't take me that long to figure out why Glee is so popular with the music and the story that goes behind it, in addition with the music and the tours they take the show on with concerts and stuff. And it didn't take me very long to find out why and learn why The Vampire Diaries is so popular. And as I mentioned, there are so many different versions of vampire stories that have been told over the last 60 to 65 years. It's hard to really figure out which one is the most popular. If you actually pay attention to The Vampire Diaries, they actually reference Twilight quite a bit in the show. Just about every third or fourth episode, they're referring to Twilight an awful lot. In I believe the third or fourth episode, they reference Twilight. You see Damon actually lying down reading the book, a few chapters out of the Twilight book, from the New Moon book actually is what he's reading it from. And it caught my attention very, very quickly and very often that they reference Twilight a lot. So maybe the writers behind the show have an ulterior motive. Maybe their ulterior motive is to criticize and make fun of Twilight, kind of like how Vampire Sucks did back in 2009, 2010, which was a parody of the whole Twilight thing, a parody of Twilight, the first film, which was released back in 2008. I think the writers definitely in the first season had an ulterior motive to make fun of Twilight, and I think they succeeded in doing so with how often they referenced Twilight. They actually had the book featured in it, and they had Damon actually make a few criticizable comments towards the whole Twilight thing. He referred to Edward as being gullible and naive, and it's just funny how all these shows either mock Twilight or try to be like Twilight in a lot of different ways. I think that Twilight's an original thing. It was popular when there were just books to read. It's even more popular now with movies. Theaters showed it 12 times a day when it was first released. The novelty was there.